This event is really a celebration of scholarship. Our featured speaker, Dr. Joseph Cunningham, is a passionate scholar and curator, and a great colleague. He deserves a Golden Star for his brilliant research and unrelenting detective work on Charles Rohlfs, who until recently, very little was known about. When I first met Joseph several years ago, he was already at work on what was to become the first major study of Rohlfs. As with everything Joseph pursues, he could barely contain his infectious enthusiasm, emailing colleagues, excitedly sharing his recent discoveries, or asking them about specific, often obscure research questions. He was constantly unearthing works by Rohlfs that no one knew existed. At every step of the way, he was generous with his knowledge. Dr. Cunningham's research culminated in the recent publication, The Artistic Furniture of Charles Rohlfs, which will accompany a major forthcoming traveling exhibition opening this June in Milwaukee, and eventually making its way to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. I know I'll be one of the first kids on the block to see the exhibition because the book is both a tour de force piece of scholarship and a gorgeous object. It's a labor of love with no detail left untouched. All photography was personally supervised by Joseph, and the design of each page was blessed with his keen, unerring eye. I'm not sure anyone will ever need to write on Rohlfs again because Dr. Cunningham hasn't left much of anything else for us to do. In addition to serving as guest curator of the artistic furniture of Charles Rohlfs, Dr. Joseph Cunningham is curator, American Decorative Art, 1900, Foundation Collection, New York, a private collection, and among the most extraordinary collections of American design, 1880 to 1925, or 20, that I have ever seen. Previously, he was curator and department head of Contemporary Art, Detroit Institute of Art, and in partnership with the Cooper Hewitt in 2003-2004, he co-curated and co-authored the exhibition and its accompanying catalog, Design Does Not Equal Art, Functional Objects from Donald Judd to Rachel Whiteread. In addition to these and other exhibitions he curated, Dr. Cunningham received his PhD in philosophy from the City University of New York Graduate Center, where he wrote his dissertation on the experimental writing of Gertrude Stein through the lens of Ludwig Wittgenstein's philosophy of language. And in his spare time, Joseph also became an award-winning classical pianist. I'm most grateful that Dr. Cunningham very kindly agreed to customize tonight's lecture with our current exhibition, to coincide with our current exhibition, House Proud. In addition to sharing his knowledge on Charles Rohlfs and his furniture, Joseph will focus on Rohlfs interiors, about which even less is known. Immediately following tonight's talk, Dr. Cunningham will be doing a book signing right over there in the lecture room. In addition, you are invited, if you have not already seen it, to go upstairs to the main floor to the recent acquisition gallery, adjacent to the admissions desk, to see the Rohlfs chair and Cooper Hewitt's collection. It's a great privilege having you as a colleague, Joseph, and I want to thank you for all that you are doing for the field of decorative arts and design and for coming tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kara, very much for that incredibly gracious introduction. And thank you all for coming, and again for braving the extremely unfortunate weather out there tonight. I'm from Wisconsin, so it doesn't bother me nearly as much as it bothers a lot of other folks, but thanks in any case. Charles Rohlfs was certainly one of the most innovative and gifted artisans of the 20th century. To this day, his dedication to individual expression, artistic integrity, and the dignity of labor stand hallmark among designers around 1900. Rohlfs was certainly rooted in the aesthetic movement and the art for art's sake framework of the House Beautiful movement, though, as we will discuss this evening, his decorative sense, particularly in his own home, did not abide by any such strict rules of home design. His lavishly decorative designs and roots in the style of the Gilded Age interiors are unsurprising, given that his artistic endeavor began in 1888 and blossomed in the last years of the 19th century. Still, he did flirt now and then, certainly, with the sinuous curves and elaborate naturalism of Art Nouveau, and in fact, he often preceded the designs of European makers in that style. Also, Louis Sullivan, whose stylized naturalism was arguably an expression of the American Art Nouveau, was an extremely important influence on Rohlfs. The artistic movement that bears the strongest imprint of his designs and thought is certainly the arts and crafts movement, with which he is often associated. Rohlfs worked primarily in oak, which of course was de rigueur for his regional arts and crafts competitors like Gustav Stickley and the Roycrofters, both of whose designs he influenced profoundly, with the kind of restrained designs, clean lines, and quarter-sawn boards you see here. And just from left to right here, you see a trefoil table from around 1888 at the left. Then in the center, the chest of drawers in the collection of the Princeton University Art Museum. And at the right, the quite extraordinary chair here in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt. But it's not any of these issues that we're going to talk about tonight. Here we're going to get the opportunity to focus on the virtually unknown interiors of Charles Rohlfs, which have been, among other things, the subject of my research for the past 3.5 years in association with the Charles Rohlfs exhibition and book project, which were a collaboration between the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Chipstone Foundation, and the American Decorative Art 1900 Foundation. Following some general comments on Rohlfs meant to orient us within the framework of his education, industrial design career, and furniture making, we're going to get the opportunity to survey some of the works he created for his various homes between 1888 and 1905. His and Anna Catherine Green's two important Buffalo residences on Norwood Avenue and Park Street, and his Adirondack camp and other institutional and privately commissioned interiors. And I hope you'll excuse the indulgence here. This happens to be Ouray, Colorado, where I was able to locate after long last, the great-granddaughter of Charles Rohlfs, who had all the family papers. Charles Rohlfs' career in furniture was the culmination of his exploration of various forms of art and design. Trained in socially progressive ideals at the Cooper Union School here in New York City, Rohlfs eventually designed cast-iron stoves in the 1870s and the 1880s for some of the largest foundries in the country. He married the famous mystery novelist Anna Catherine Green in 1884, and together they worked to create various home interiors that expressed their highly personal taste. Likewise, they even worked together in designing some furniture, a discovery which is covered at length both in the book and in last month's magazine Antiques. Typical of many furniture designers, Charles Rohlfs' first experiments in furniture were created largely for his own use. First, a few pieces he created for the family home in Brooklyn, then for their various homes in Buffalo, where they arrived in July of 1887. The family needed furniture for their new home, and some of these pieces were indeed being designed and built by Anna Catherine and Charles. Although their Brooklyn home had contained a mahogany chair and mantel shelves designed and made by the couple, it is a drawing, this drawing, for the corner in the study of Anna Catherine Green in their new home in Buffalo that occasions our first glimpse into the couple's decorative style and their sense of interior. The sketch here shows a settee, a pedestal table, a vase, a carpet on the floor, drapes in the window or doorway, decorative wainscoting, and possibly wall covering. This interior sketch was frankly an odd way for Rohlfs to first present himself, to introduce himself to the public. It consists largely of loosely organized rhythms of lines, dashes, squiggles, and arcs that belie his extensive training as a draftsman. The walls with their corner perspective, partial doorway, and lined floor only suggest the space of the room itself. The partially rendered wainscoting and wall covering that trail off at the edges indicates that this sketch, I think, really should be thought of not so much as a finished interior, but really just something to give a sense of the room. For some reason, rather than sketching an object or two of his own design, Charles chose instead to present an interior, complete with things by Anna Catherine and him, as well as the rug, the textile, the ceramic vase, and wall covering that the couple clearly had nothing to do with designing or making. Are we to understand this as a casual presentation of an interior, a serious staging of the Rohlfs furniture, a snapshot of the lifestyle of a famous author and her less well-known husband who made furniture in his spare time? It is unclear how to construe this drawing. It's also unclear which of the Rohlfs' residences around 1888 is depicted, if it's in fact of any of them. In Buffalo, the family first lived at the Fillmore Hotel, the former home of President Millard Fillmore, which had become a boarding house, and they lived there for a short time. Then they moved to Linwood Avenue in the late summer of 1887, and then again to 62 Tracy Street on the 1st of May in 1888. That's probably where they were living at this moment, mid-1888, where their diary mentions they were, quote, living opposite Mrs. Rumsey's Park. Unfortunately, Mrs. Rumsey's Park isn't in Buffalo or identifiable anymore, so it's really impossible to know whether the drawing depicts a real room or, in fact, an imagined space. Despite the peculiarity of the rendering and its presentation, the accompanying descriptions and drawing of the objects provide, I think, an interesting insight into the couple's design sense, their ornamental vocabulary, and their attention to materials. Quote, "The coloring of the room is principally old gold. The settee is polished oak and was designed by Charles Rohlfs of Buffalo. The cushions are of peacock blue plush, those at the back being held up by knobbed pins in their loops. The pieces of the settee are fastened by round head brass screws, no glue being used." Quite a description. The gold coloration of the room may refer most directly to the wall and doorway coverings and the carpet. By the same token, the elaborately carved or fretted slats and border of the wainscoting may have been rubbed with gold or bronze leaf or a pigment to give them a shimmering reflectivity, a technique that Rohlfs used in decorative objects later in his career. The intricate systems of branching verticals terminating in fiddlehead-like finials and border curves are certainly complex enough that one might wonder whether Rohlfs used gold highlighting on their surfaces to call attention to their decorative motifs. Here is the settee from the drawing as it exists today. And here is the closely related trefoil table, which is the only surviving piece of Rohlfs furniture from that early date, around 1888, which was also made for Rohlfs' own interior. And we'll see it in a number of interior shots later on. Just a few years after the drawing appeared in 1888, in 1890, Charles and Anna Catherine and their two children, Rosamond and Sterling, set off for a grand tour of Europe. Keep in mind images like this one, the Rohlfs' favorite interior in Europe, the great room at Warwick Castle in England. The baronial lifestyle will play an important role in shaping their own attempts to create royal living in their own Queen City of the Lakes, Buffalo. Here we see a crib made in 1892, drawing of it, just a few years after their return from Europe. And this was made for the Rohlfs' third child, Roland. This image is the only link we have between the earliest efforts in creating their home environment and Charles' transition to professional furniture making in 1897. In his first professional attempt at the design and execution of decorative art, Charles seemed to have fashioned a desk for the use of his wife. And in fact, he made it right up here. The first at the left here is their address on Orton Place, where they were living in 1897 when Rohlfs did in fact change his official registration in the town directory to furniture construction. And it's particularly interesting because this is an arts corridor at the time in Buffalo where they lived amidst artists and writers and furniture makers. Quite an interesting sort of brew on this street, and they were lucky enough to live on this street, and in fact this attic right up here is in fact where Rohlfs made his first pieces of furniture as a professional furniture maker. And here is the desk at the left that we're going to talk about. In his first professional attempt, it is this desk that he made. Already concerned with domestic usefulness as well as beauty, Rohlfs asserted that, quote, "the leading notion of this desk and its design is utility." Which makes sense, of course, insofar as he was making the piece for his wife to use as a writing desk, and she was, in fact, a writer. According to analysis of the object and period accounts of the writing desk, Charles tried to make it ergonomic. He designed a place where Anna Catherine could really write her novels and her poetry. Given the date of 1897 and the couple's predilection toward all things Victorian, it is unsurprising that this desk, both in form and decoration, relates closely to this prevailing late 19th century style. Nicely imbalanced, with a small cabinet at its left proper side and a single leg opposite, its form demonstrates typical late 19th century design. The decorative motif on the right proper end satisfies the eye with balance and unity, while the front aspect agitates the viewer with a kind of instability. The fretwork on the writing desk is both ornamental, as in the flourish adorning the crest of the right proper leg where it meets the desktop, and utilitarian in the supports for the book rack and shelf attached at the rear of the desktop. So you see the fretwork adjoining the leg here, and then this fretwork used to form the shelving on top. Decorative nailheads, sometimes structural, but often merely decorative, also adorn the desk, featured especially in its panel at the left front proper, where the metal of the nailheads and the inset metal medallion call to mind Rohlfs' designs for cast iron stoves. Where the decorative scrolls meet the right proper leg, there's a Beaux-Arts image, a bearded godlike character with flowing locks, and that's hard to see, but it's right there. It's a typical late 19th century boss, not unlike this. This is the Green Man character, common, of course, in architecture and design from the medieval period on, and this is actually a carved wood Green Man from the fireplace in my bedroom at the Dakota, on a fireplace mantle. The calendar rack shown here at the left, likely designed and constructed in 1898 or 1899, is a bold move forward in the Rohlfs home inventory. The highly sculptural stand is really an open framework which is fitted with a rotating book holder, as well as a set of interlocking planes of virtuosically carved flame-shaped elements that form the feet, the front, the side lattice braces, the interior stretcher and braces, and the finials atop the stand. Among the most structurally and decoratively ambitious pieces constructed by Rohlfs in 1898 and 1899 for his home interior is the china cabinet shown on the right, which forgoes the easy opulence of ornate carving, instead exploring complex geometry, patterned ornament, and a wonderful sense of whimsy, I think. The china cabinet was likely originally constructed as an entirely separate case, and this is very common in Rohlfs interiors. Below it, brackets probably screwed directly into the wall, and they supported a shelf board that may or may not have also been attached originally to the wall. As we'll see later, this cabinet was utilized by the Rohlfs family in a variety of ways and adapted repeatedly to meet their needs in various installations in their home interior. Here we see two of the most ambitious and extraordinary chairs made by Rohlfs. At the left is the famous Princeton Chair, and at the right, the desk chair, designed and executed by Charles and Anna Catherine Green in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York. Both of these chairs have been repeatedly referred to, this is very important, as specifically made for Rohlfs' home, but neither of them was. In fact, both were given model numbers, and they were priced in different woods during the period and offered by Rohlfs as a part of the line of furniture he was developing around 1900. They ended up in his house, but they were not made for his house. It's very important. The folding screen shown here, in contrast, was made for his house, and now it's in the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. Unlike the two chairs, the reverse of the period photograph of this work is devoid of any marks but for the photographer's stamp. It was not ever priced, nor given a model number, nor was it ever offered in any advertisement or any catalog. The extant model is the only one known, and likely the only one ever made by Rohlfs. As we will see, this is an object that Rohlfs proudly displayed in a variety of his interior contexts. Though Rohlfs rarely created variations on his own design, his interior, his concern with his own home, occasions one such observable case. The two chiffoniers here are a case of this. The one on the left is almost surely the one that Rolf's son Roland reported had been shown at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in 1901. The one on the right, however, which was given by Roland to the Princeton University Art Museum, featuring slightly different decoration, is a model created by Rohlfs for his own home in the same year as the fair. Because this model was obviously one that Rohlfs repeated and later offered in his 1907 catalog, this piece should probably not be regarded properly as a work for the Rohlfs home. 1902 was an important year for Rohlfs in terms of developing his own home furnishings, now on Norwood Avenue. The candle stand at the left in the collection of the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh and the hanging wall shelf in a private collection are both works created for his interior in that year. Though the candle stand is known in other extant versions that were likely not for the Rohlfs home, the hanging shelf on the right has just one known companion, also from the Rohlfs home, which is in the collection of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Also in the LACMA collection is the coal bucket shown here at the left. Various versions of this coal hod and the Curate's Delight stand shown at the right were made and marketed during the period around 1900, including one of each model that was retained in the collection of Rohlfs. Though the coal hod is largely a sculptural object, only tertiarily useful, the stand actually is a good way to bring cakes, pies, tea, or coffee to the dining table, which is sort of an interesting point related to interiors, indicating some kind of utility related to the domestic life of Charles and Anna Catherine. Though, again, neither of these pieces should be particularly associated with the home, as there are many examples of them extant that were not for the home specifically. The tall case clock here, shown from the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, on the left, is an excellent example of work for the Rohlfs home that combines his international awareness of, for example, Richard Rimmerschmidt, on whose design it is based, with his own quirky sense of beauty that permeated the Norwood house in the first years of the century. Similarly, the octagonal cabinet at the right held an intimate place in the Rohlfs home, set immediately next to the bed in the master bedroom. Lighting was not ever a focus for Rohlfs over his decade of decorative art design, but this lamp from 1903, which he made for his own interior, demonstrates that he could indeed rise to the occasion. Made of sheet copper with applied mixed metals in a shade of kappa shells, this lamp stands among the most distinctive of any Rohlfs works for his own interior. He entertained the notion of producing this lamp, in fact, then he raised the price, eventually marked the whole experiment not for sale, indicating that there was indeed a process to his determinations of the practicability of producing works like this one that were originally intended for his own personal use. Two last objects bear mentioning before we begin our examination of the composition of Rohlfs interiors. The wastebasket at the left and the rocking stool at the right are both works that Rohlfs created for his own interior, in what we might call a more restrained arts and crafts style. They both exhibit inventive use of materials and a subtlety of design and execution rarely seen on such modest works. Well, as 1904 wound down, Charles Rohlfs, now 51 years old, may have been getting a little bored or a little frustrated with yet another career, having been an actor, a stove maker, and now a furniture maker. In this case, of course, he was getting bored with the crowning achievement for his life, furniture design, and he wasn't ready to let it go. In that decade, in less than a decade of furniture design, he had gone from obscurity to a position of significant rank among innovative furniture makers at the turn of the century. He had created some of the most significant decorative art of the early modern period in the United States, and he had gained international recognition for his artistic accomplishments. Still, between 1904 and 1907, he was restless, and he became committed to a new goal. Rather than producing radical art furniture as he had before, he focused on creating a successful business. He pursued this goal in two very divergent strategies. One, special commissions, particularly interiors, and two, mass marketing, the first of which obviously is our focus for this evening. As we've discussed, from the start of his profession as a furniture maker, Rohlfs designed and made furniture both for his own interiors and on request for his clients and their interiors. This approach was well suited to his desire to create objects that were appropriate for their owner and their purpose and their owner's interiors. Most of his significant work was too idiosyncratic, frankly, as Rohlfs would have called it, too artistic. For general consumption, it took a very particular buyer to want this kind of material. His lack of success at Marshall Field around 1900 is very good evidence of this problem. Still, there were individuals with a taste for the Rohlfs style. For example, in 1904, a patron likely came to Rohlfs asking for a desk of the same form as the desk with overhead gallery shown at the left, which Rohlfs had attempted around 1899. This earlier desk in remarkable green finish was structurally unsound and needed to be restructured to provide adequate support for its massive overhead gallery. For his second attempt, Rohlfs re-engineered the desk from feet to finials, creating an extraordinary early example of what we might call modular furniture. The two fundamental failures of the desk with overhead gallery were the unified construction of the overall desk, which made it virtually immovable, and the prohibitively massive upper cabinet, complete with heavy oak drawers inside, which broke the arms at its sides. And it's actually quite interesting. This desk may very well have been made, it turns out, as recently discovered, for a scientist. And in fact, all these very heavy oak drawers may have been specimen drawers in which little specimens of insects and things like that were kept. The problem is that that introduces so much overconstruction, and the weight of this cabinet, the weight of this cabinet became so heavy that, of course, these arms eventually broke. And that's why the whole thing had to be re-engineered. In the 1904 commissioned model, Rohlfs solved both structural issues of the earlier model, successfully creating a desk with suspended gallery rather than one with just a gallery up there. The two cases forming the base of this desk are in fact freestanding. From the front view, the right proper case is adorned with, of course, the commissioned F, which is shown right here. It's a little bit hard to see. I'm sorry, there's an F in that the shield right there. Then this is a freestanding cabinet with a drawer that opens on this side. This is a freestanding cabinet with drawers. This just sits on the top. These go down through the back to hold the whole thing together on a system of dowels. And then the cabinet up here is, ta-da, hanging. Where this one failed to hang, this one actually hangs. How did he accomplish it? Very simply. He lightened up the construction up here enormously. You'll see there are no heavy drawers up there. These cabinets are both empty. This is all empty. And of course, these are much lighter drawers than these big index drawers. And of course, he adorned the back with wonderful detailing as well. Though Charles Rohlfs' fame, to the extent that he ever had particular fame, and the demand for his furniture, to the extent that there was ever demand for his furniture, waned significantly after 1904. Around this time, his neighbors, interestingly enough, on Norwood Avenue, just down the street about 5 or 6 houses, engaged him for an unusual project, a fun project, the remodeling of their attic in their late 19th century home into a performance and entertaining space, an art salon. Though by no means a full interior, this project demonstrates Rohlfs' willingness to work with his clients to produce work at, frankly, a range of levels. Quintessentially Rohlfsian patterns of fretwork were applied to the slanted ceiling along with the shaped beams jutting out from the framework with candle holders. And of course you can see here are the beams and there are the candle holders, and here's some of the fretwork that was applied all along here. Likely influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright's design circa 1903 and 1904 for the Darwin Martin house just across town in Buffalo, Rohlfs created a stunning hanging lighting fixture, here actually a pair of them, that are as elegant as they are severe. Rohlfs also provided ordinary side tables and chairs, likely made so simple because they were obviously being used in a performing space and they didn't need to be particularly fancy. They were entertaining type pieces. Complete here with a stage, a piano, and a variety of Rohlfs made and other household furniture, this eclectic environment encapsulates the odd result of assimilating Rohlfs' works into with the other designs of an interior. It also hints at the artistic and social community in which Charles and Anna Catherine were immersed in Buffalo. And it's this lighting fixture that's particularly important in relation to Frank Lloyd Wright. And here, unfortunately, you can see what happened to it. In the 1960s, it was painted and retrofitted with this lovely little canister lamp through the middle there. But you can still see the framework and all of the original wood. It's all there. It's unfortunately just been painted and has this horrible light box inserted into the middle of it. Here you can see the lovely white painted ceiling, which, thank God, they didn't take all the fretting off of. And in fact, there are all the original rafter beams with the original candle holders as well. Also, likely made by Rohlfs and completely unknown to anyone in the world, is this fireplace, which is just a simple terracotta block construction with these wonderful little metal fasteners that hold the whole thing together, and a wonderful little metal framework with a screen. Rohlfs is known to have made a few fireplaces, but things like this are completely unknown other than on this screen right now. Like her husband, Anna Catherine showed considerable interest in the interiors they were developing for their Norwood Avenue home. In a letter of 21 July 1903, she describes the interior and includes a photograph of it in a letter to a friend, suggesting that she was, quote, not the principal designer of its space and its contents. She goes on to say, the individual taste of Mr. Rohlfs is visible everywhere in our home. Anna Catherine and Charles continued to decorate their home while supporting the local art scene in Buffalo around this time, commissioning a pair of portraits by the artist Emma Kahn and the artist Annie Crawford, who were both members of the important Buffalo Women's Educational and Industrial Union, which was founded in the late 19th century as a way for artists to meet and promote their work in Buffalo. And they commissioned those portraits early in 1905. We'll see those portraits later in their home. These paintings were, of course, unsurprisingly, framed in artistically carved oak frames by Charles Rohlfs for their family interior. The convergence of the public's interest in Anna Catherine Green and the furniture and decorative art of her husband yielded two important glimpses into their home and its interior. In September of 1906, The Home Life of a Popular Storyteller, Anna Catherine Green as a Wife and Mother, written by Rolf's good friend Deschler Welch, gave readers of Book News Monthly a glimpse into the, quote, picturesque little house on Norwood Avenue in Buffalo of the writer and her furniture-making husband. The, quote, unpretentious home, pervaded by a domestic rather than a literary atmosphere, has a piazza covered with vines and barricaded by rose bushes. In summertime, an inviting lounging place with its antique patterned settees, its pillows, and its rugs. And in fact, there is the piazza, and there are the rose bushes. There's Anna Catherine and her daughter Rosamond sitting on the front of the front stoop of the house. Signaling his turn from art furniture to interiors and a concern with commerce, Charles Rohlfs here is described as a man of business rather than an artist or an artisan, which, though Welch does add that he is one who, quote, dignifies labor by his art and who might be considered in some ways the William Morris of this country. The greatest insight about Rohlfs' interiors in this article comes from that all-important picture of Anna Catherine's study, which we examined earlier. A product of their taste for a rich, enveloping interior and the natural repository for many of Rohlfs' unsold works, the Norwood Avenue house is unrelentingly over-decorated and is in many ways diametrically opposed to the restrained spaces being promoted, for example, in Stickley's Craftsman magazine. For all the clutter, the picture is invaluable as a guide to some of the furniture with which the Rohlfs family lived. We can locate in the photograph here, of course, Anna Catherine's writing desk, the two flanking magazine bins or wastebasket. Here's one of those, and here's the other. Of course, there's the 1888 settee, and here's a version of the tall back rocking chair, and back here, of course, the plant stand. What in certain ways is more interesting to me, actually, are these wonderful prints, many of which they brought back with them from Europe, and in particular, the textiles in the window. This kind of Germanic, and in often cases German, patterned textile is something that Anna Catherine was very interested in, and in fact, the pattern books and this kind of patterning had a great influence eventually on both of their designs for furniture and decorative motifs. Even earlier photography, not this is the house as it looks today, is included in another article, which we're going to get to now, from the same period, whose title announces Anna Catherine to be, quote, Buffalo's most noted novelist. The article was written when Anna Catherine's millionaire baby was in the publisher's hands, placing it in late 1904, just before the publication of this novel in January of 1905. As a lavishly illustrated first documentation of the Rohlfs' home on Norwood Avenue, this article is very exciting, really invaluable for understanding the interiors that the couple created for themselves. The unassuming three-story Victorian house, which you see here, shown first in an exterior view of the home of Anna Catherine Green, is of modest Victorian design. It's a typical home in a charming Buffalo neighborhood. Her home, the article announces, quote, is a delightful abode, and the rooms express more than anything else a sense of rest. Certainly to the modern eye, the clutter in these pictures might not convey that same sensibility, but the journalist found in the rooms, quote, everything artistic, but nothing lavish to detract from the reposeful atmosphere of the place. Perhaps in comparison to an aesthetic movement interior or a Victorian interior, these claims might be warranted, but the sheer volume of objects in each room calls this statement into question. The fusion of Charles and Anna Catherine's artistic pursuits is the focus of the article. It is seldom one finds a couple so equally gifted, she writes. While Mrs. Rohlfs has been called an artist of words, Mr. Rohlfs has won a name for himself in the designing of furniture, to which he applies his principles of beauty and utility. The copious pictures offer the most insight into the works by Rohlfs with which the family lived. The large photograph first in the article documents the sitting room and parts of the other two rooms visible through a pair of arched doorways. Objects identifiable in the picture include, in the foreground, of course, another version, or perhaps actually more likely the same version, just moved around the house, of this rocking chair that we talked about earlier. Likely the same one shown in the book News Monthly. Near the center of the picture, we can identify the man's chair or Greek chair, which is a typical design based on a Greek precedent, in oak with slung leather straps for armrests and an upholstered seat cushion. And actually, upholstery is a very important point with Rohlfs. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's an upholstered seat cushion sitting right there. Comfort, not just oak. The chair's backrest is quite notable as well. It's very hard to see, but if you blow this picture up a lot, you can see that it's actually fashioned with vertical leather or upholstery strips, a highly innovative, very strange format, which I actually have rarely seen on any other pieces of decorative art. There is actually one extant example, at least, of the man's chair with leather-slung arms with intact leather arm straps and a nicely fretted and carved backrest, which is in a private collection here in New York. To the right and forward in the picture is an example of the hall chair, which you see the back of right here. And here you see an absolutely stunning example, which Kara actually acquired for the St. Louis Art Museum before she left and came here to New York. And this one is absolutely extraordinary example. What's particularly unusual about this one, and I'll call your attention to, is this extra bit of piercing right at the crest there. Very recently, a chair came to market which actually had this feature unlike any other known example of the chair, likely indicating that it was in fact from Rolf's own house. Very exciting. Near the center, above this chair, here is a version of the cresset stick on that shelf, which you see another version of right here. Then we can also identify the trefoil table right back here, which has a ceramic bowl set on a little oak pedestal right there, and then a version of the coal hod is set right here into the next room. In the next photograph in the article, the viewer has moved through the right doorway in the previous picture and is now standing just past that doorway in yet another parlor or sitting room. Overhead here is a chandelier that recalls the, quote, big candlestick as large around as a barrel hoop and with sockets for a half-dozen candles, which Rolf showed in his Dutch kitchen installation at the Pan American Exposition. And my theory is actually after the exposition, like most expositions, everything goes sort of, what do you do with all this stuff that was made for a site-specific installation like that? Well, he took the lighting fixture home with him, which is sort of, I think, a reasonable thing to have done. Rohlfs also designed here the overmantel, whose branching vertebral structure evokes the work of German, Belgian, and French Art Nouveau designers. The complex interlocking structure here crosses candelabra imagery with vegetal motifs, terminating at the top with a diamond-shaped lattice work, all of which call to mind, of course, the work of Victor Horta, Richard Riemerschmidt, and particularly Henry van der Velde. It is unclear whether this ornamental pattern, and this is, I think, a very interesting point, was created in metal, plaster, fabric, or some other material. And I think it would be very interesting for someone to analyze these period pictures very carefully to try and figure out what exactly that material was. In the next room in the rear, the pierced and carved chime call is attached to the right side of the door jamb, and that is right here. And it's hanging right above a Curate's Delight stand, which we can see here. This form is sitting right there with a coffee or tea service on it, again reflecting the Rohlfs' own use of these objects in their home. And also, again, you can see the coal hod here. And of course, this lamp is shown right here. And it's particularly useful for dating this lamp that it is, in fact, shown here. Because one of the questions, obviously, is when did Rolf start using the capichelles? And when did he start making lighting forms? And this, because this article appears in 1904, it's probable in 1903, Rolf seems to have started importing the capichelles for works in that year. Later, in later period photography, this room also included the folding screen shown here. And of course, this chair, again, the evolution of Rolf's interiors was quite interesting. Here's the early version of this chair. It was retrofitted over and over and over again by Rolf and eventually looked like this at the time of this photograph. The last picture in the article provides another perspective on the beautiful hanging candelabrum overhead, and in the distance, the lamp. The large dining table with elaborately carved feet is surrounded by 6 chairs. In the center is a lovely small oak pedestal holding a ceramic glass bowl. This is very typical of Rolf's decoration of his own interiors, that he would use these imported glass and ceramic pieces in a way fused with his own work. He would often make pedestals just like this for works of ceramic and glass. The most notable piece of furniture in this picture is really the china cabinet, the hanging china cabinet, with an elegant corner server set underneath it. As depicted here, the china cabinet has a different overall sensibility than when it was shown in the House Beautiful in January of 1900, as it's seen on the right here. By 1904, the china cabinet was installed with a large lobed gallery rather than the spiked finial shown earlier, and this is an important difference here to here. The simpler effect focuses our attention on the cabinet, especially its glazed doors and its exquisite fretwork. I must mention, however, the decorative excess with which these rooms are obviously organized. This room is complete with gaudy Victorian wallpaper, typical of the period, but very much at odds with the more austere arts and crafts design sensibility of some of Rolf's furniture. Rohlfs may have disliked this gaudiness himself, because around 1908 or 1909, Rohlfs remodeled the Norwood Avenue dining room, replacing the Victorian wall cover with the more elegant wood paneling and a stenciled decoration on the ceiling. So innovative was his renovation of the space that a local firm reported his use of its wallboard product, beaver board as it was called, to modernize the dining room in an advertisement in the House Beautiful in March of 1909. The firm, the Beaver Manufacturing of Buffalo, boasted that its product was, quote, made of selected pure wood fiber, shredded and pressed into panels, 33 sizes of uniform thickness. Though Rohlfs may have been attracted to it as a non-conductor of heat and a sound deadener, which could be easily applied with nails direct into studding, one has to wonder what he thought about using such elaborately engineered, non-natural products in his home, devotee of good old oak. Commissions, certainly, like this, were going to become important, but it's particularly interesting to watch the evolution of the Norwood house first. Well, commissions for furniture were surely welcome with Rohlfs, but they may never have been enough to sustain a workshop. He always sought relationships that would result in the commissions for sets of his furniture and decorative objects in private homes, businesses, and clubrooms. In his career, Rohlfs received several commissions for complete interiors, about which we're going to talk now. In January 1909, the Buffalo Times, surveying his career as a furniture maker before he acknowledged that it was essentially over, reported, quote, "The home of Marshall Field in Chicago has room after room furnished with pieces from the Rohlfs workshop. The Cleveland home of one of America's wealthiest citizens has a Rohlfs room. Palatial mansions in Chicago, Paris, London, Bremen, New York, Philadelphia, and Buffalo, as well as smaller towns both here and abroad, have handsome pieces designed and executed by this Buffalonian." While relatively little is known about any of those alleged projects. Fortunately, 2 commissions for interiors in great lodges in the Adirondacks of upstate New York offer us some information. The earlier and larger commission was for Camp Ziegler, a 29-acre camp owned by the family of William Ziegler, who had made his fortune in baking powder and was famous for funding expeditions to reach the North Pole. Camp Ziegler was considered one of the finest camps in its section of the Adirondacks. The main lodge on the north shore of Loon Lake was planned by architect James Burleigh, working from designs of Louis Kiemig. The woodwork is of chestnut here, stained a faded brown, while the furniture, which was especially designed and built for the room by Mr. Charles Rohlfs of Buffalo, New York, incorporates the locally famous tamarack tree. Although the building was not featured, and this is actually quite important, in International Studio in July of 1909, it seems that Rohlfs was actually engaged before October of 1904, way earlier than had originally been thought, when William Ziegler was injured in a runaway accident from which he never recovered. He actually died quickly after that, May of 1905, leaving his adopted son, William Jr., aged 13 or 14, as the primary heir of a fortune in excess of $10 million. Well, interestingly enough, when Dad died and left his 13-year-old son, a very rich boy, the boy got fun with the furniture. And sure enough, here's the children's room, designed largely by Rohlfs through the lens of a 13-year-old. In the main rooms, there was a little bit more of the tamarack tree right here and right here that we heard of, a little bit more of a serious demeanor. But it's very interesting when Dad dies in the middle of a project and a 13-year-old sort of is working with Rohlfs, what happens, faces, and all kinds of fun things in furniture. The 2 published photographs of the main lodge for Ziegler show an enormous living room, quote, 50 feet wide and 32 feet deep, filled with Rohlfs furniture. Although the living room was ambitious in scale, many of the basic furniture forms, unfortunately, were not originated for this site, but were merely reworked to fit into an Adirondack scheme. And this is unsurprising. Rohlfs at this point didn't want to make a lot of new designs, so what he did is this kind of thing. He took his own dining room chair design, and he just adapted it. He put some trees in it to make it look a little bit Adirondack-like. Unsurprising. I mean, I probably wouldn't, at his age, well into his 60s, design a lot of furniture myself, when you can just use old things and dress them up with a little Adirondack detailing. Various versions of early forms, including a radically simplified model of the rocking chair shown here from around 1899, and a ladderback chair from 1901, like the one in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt, along with a variety of simple tables and small cabinets, were complemented by pedestal tables, lamps, with metal bases, and shell shades similar to those that we examined earlier, all sort of reworking of stuff that we had seen before. And you can see lots of examples of that here. Rather than this fancy medallion, he just put a little crossbar in there. Simplify the design, make it easier to produce, quicker to produce, and you end up with a sort of quick Adirondack lodge interior. Similarly, here you see, rather than the complexity of having these cushions freestanding, he actually solidified the back of the chair and made it upholsterable at a third-party location so that the whole chair and the cushions wouldn't have to be made at one location. He could adapt it for mass production and get it done quicker, easier, and cheaper. Unfortunately, the main lodge at Camp Ziegler burned to the ground in 1972. Rohlfs was commissioned also to design furniture for the interior of an octagonal building that was part of an Adirondack camp located on Lake Wilbert, now Little Simon Pond in Franklin County, New York. The camp here was built for William A. Reed, the founder of the bond broker William A. Reed and Company, which later became Dillon Reed and Company. The architects here were Davis McGrath and Shepard. Photographs of this lodge, including its interior, appeared in several period publications, particularly those about the great camps of the Adirondacks. Miraculously, the interior Rohlfs created here is extant and almost untouched, unchanged from the interior shown here in a photograph that was published soon after the lodge was completed. The octagonal dining room that Rohlfs decorated here was set down below the main house, perched over the lake, and seems to have been used for entertaining. And here you can see the octagonal section back here, and then these were guest rooms up here on the front. Included among the designs for this substantial commission were a massive sideboard, a pair of daybed-style settles with side armrests, a large octagonal dining table, a large set of dining room chairs, a large log holder, a serving side table, and 2 pairs of candlesticks. These pieces demonstrate Rohlfs' ability to create novel works that emphasize the local Adirondack style and work together today as a ravishing ensemble. Although it is unknown whether Rohlfs himself had any say in the building's architecture, its octagonal shape is one with which Rohlfs certainly had considerable affinity and familiarity. He had used the octagon often. He sought to emphasize this shape throughout the room, for example, in his inventive design shown here for an octagonal pedestal base for the massive dining room table in the center of the room. And there is a slightly closer image of it. The overall room design matched large pieces of furniture carefully proportioned to each of 8 walls. They were very much built for exactly the environment they were put in. The table is a wonderful example of Rohlfs' late work, complete with an upward sweeping pine tree motif shown here, seen on every piece from the installation, and on each of the paneled sides of the pedestal base for the table. Rohlfs' small version of the R in boson mark, often associated with his later work, is seen on the tabletop's molded edge just above the impressed date 1907, probably the date in which the commission was completed. Each chair exhibits an inset panel in the backrest that features a similar pine tree motif. Below the rush seat in each case, the sides are set with vertically oriented trees, uniting the cross-stretchers in the seat above. Exposed tenons pierce the sides of each cross-stretcher just below the carved tree's trunk and are set with large, simply shaped keys. Perhaps the most satisfying pieces of furniture from this suite are a pair of daybed-style window seats set today just as they were originally in 1907, below 2 large windows overlooking the lake outside, directly opposite the main entrance to the room. These 2 striking seating forms feature carved double pine tree panels, one immediately below each armrest. Stretched horizontally, this inventive imagery displays some of the most virtuosic carving in the room. Again, exaggerated tenon and key detailing is featured at the joint where the seat meets the front and rear legs, and rather clumsy, Stickley-like corbels are set just below the armrests. These settles nicely frame the doors of to the exterior. They also create a seamless transition from the oak floors to the walls, for which Rohlfs was also responsible, both the floors and all the paneling on the walls. And they frame beautifully the view of the pines and the lake outside the window. Open and inviting, perfectly situated, they allow anyone who sits in them to enjoy the view first and foremost, keeping their elegant details to the sides and allowing the viewer to come on these ornamental designs entirely by chance. The most imposing piece of furniture for this dining room is, of course, the enormous sideboard, more than 6 feet tall and about 8 feet wide, which dominates one entire side of the room to the left of the main entrance. The side posts, with pine tree motifs carved entirely from single boards, and side panels with 3 trees carved in each, are testaments to Rohlfs' creativity even at this late date of production. A charming serving table set with carved and fretted pine trees, and a large, well-designed log holder with inset panels featuring 4 pine trees in a layered formation complete the set. Rohlfs is also likely to have designed the large metal chandelier overhead, along with the fireplace hood, the andirons, and the fire tools. More significant than any of these designs or structural or ornamental details is the room's overall aesthetic and the harmonious relationship of the Rohlfs custom furniture with the standard model Gustav Stickley and Joseph McHugh furniture in other parts of the lodge. Rather than imposing his own vision of beauty and good design on his late interiors, Rohlfs proved his ability to understand, for example, the Adirondack style and to assimilate his own design sense to that form of architecture and lifestyle. And here you see some particularly notable pieces of McHugh. This is an exceedingly rare Morris chair by McHugh, which is retained at the lodge and in fantastically original condition. This is also an extremely rare settee by McHugh, which is also basically every single piece of furniture is still there, and they're all still in the positions that you see them in the pictures, which is quite remarkable. Rohlfs was always keen to build his furniture business and to turn a profit. Having failed to sell through local retail outlets and national retail outlets, he sought always new ways to find potential customers. There are few extant works from 1905 to 1907, and almost no works identifiable after 1907. The American economy was in serious decline in 1907, which likely paralyzed Rohlfs' ability to sell works or to generate commissions for any new interiors. One notable exception is the chair you see here, which is a chair that Rohlfs designed for the interior of a Cornell University fraternity. The reverse of the period photograph of this chair reads, quote, "Liberal dining chair, $1, $30 in black ink, and Cornell University frat house in graphite." Though the liberal dining chair shown here was unknown until recently, I located the very one photographed at the time of its design, around 1906 to 1920, during the research for this book. And in fact, this one is this one, the grain matches. The model features straightforward design and simple construction consistent with Rohlfs' intention to produce it in quantity. This overall simplicity is elegantly countered with a beautiful small carved panel set into the backrest. The overall structure was of course designed to be mass producible, and the frame is composed such that the leather upholstering, for which Rohlfs' shop was of course not set up, could be completed elsewhere. Unfortunately, Rohlfs seems not to have won the commission for this fraternity, because the example shown here in the period photograph and the one extant is the only one that is known. And I'm very grateful to Paul Urban, who's actually here tonight, for explaining to me details about the construction of this chair. It's particularly notable that there's actually cross-bracing below this chair, meaning that this seat can just pop out, be upholstered somewhere else, pop into the chair. Likewise, this panel could be just popped in, and the panel holding this pillow could be popped in. It's very interesting that Rohlfs understood these issues related to upholstery well enough that he was a keen enough designer and understood the issues well enough that he could design it such that it could be upholstered somewhere else after his work was done, and then the whole thing could just be popped together. Very smart design. Well, finally, after more than 2 decades of decorating their various interiors around Buffalo, Charles and Anna Catherine finally contracted, quote, with an architect to keep us from doing anything foolish. The couple hired Colson and Hodson up in Buffalo and began work on their dream home, which was to be completed at 156 Park Street in 1912. The overall simple structure of the house reflected Anna Catherine's no-nonsense sensibility, along with Charles' better tendencies toward arts and crafts restraint. The house was simply composed with stucco coating and an unassuming character, though certain arts and crafts details were featured in order to give the eye a bit of pleasure, as Anna Catherine called it. Rohlfs designed the interior, employing complex fretted woodwork throughout, along with the elaborate plasterwork and related metal lighting fixtures with designs that pay an obvious homage to Louis Sullivan, which we'll get to. The couple's tendency toward excessive decoration was unfortunately combined with the huge set of furniture and decorative objects that made their way into the Park Street home as a result of Charles' inability to sell many of his works. Period pictures of this entrance hall, for example, show the imperial Chinese candlestick, a form offered in Rohlfs' 1907 portfolio of illustrations, and likely the one pictured there. It's only extant in one example today. There's also a beautiful fretwork screened corner chair, similar to one from 1899. The chimes and the lamp at Norwood Avenue both made their way to locations in this entrance hall as well. And of course, on the landing of the stairwell is the tall case clock. So back here is the clock, which you see here. There's an edge of the lamp. There's the chime bells, like these ones. Here, of course, is this chair, which is related to this chair. Here's the Imperial Chinese right there in the center of the picture. And this lighting fixture, actually, parts of it are still extant, but it's no longer in the house. It's in someone's garage in a cardboard box. In the living room, Rohlfs placed a variety of old favorites as well, including the tall-back chair and the desk chair here and here. 2 of Charles's elaborately carved masterpieces that you see there, but they're now flanking the square table with fretwork from Norwood Avenue, which you see right here. There's also a coal hod, a rocking chair, a circular table with carved medallions encircling the base. Also shown there is a stunning 1907 ebonized oak stand this one shown here, which again features a piece of glass that they either imported in 1890 when they returned from Europe, or perhaps received as a gift or purchased themselves from one of the retailers that sold things like that around 1900. This study furniture now sits in front of the living room window. Also visible are the man's chair with leather-slung arms, Anna Catherine's writing desk, and a wastebasket, and the ladder-back chair. And here you see the same form here that's in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt. This is the desk we talked about earlier. The leather-slung arms are there. These two chairs are right here, and you can see here, back here under the window is the settee right here. And of course the wastebasket is right there next to her desk, where one would expect a wastebasket to be. From another angle are visible the calendar rack, a variant of the tallback rocking chair, and a small rocking stool, which descended in the Rohlfs family, and as I mentioned before, is in the collection of the Princeton University Art Museum. On walls throughout the room, a variety of sconces and shelves similar to the accoutrements of Norwood Avenue were also installed. There are actually andirons in here, which I think there's pretty good evidence were also designed by Rohlfs. Here's one of the portraits that we mentioned earlier, which were commissioned to local Buffalo artists, and again, more of the kinds of European prints that the Rohlfs brought back with them from Europe. Finally, this plaster capital is another version of the plaster capital that we saw before. And here's a picture of it from 1970. They are, in some sense, still in the house. They've started decaying. They've started drying out and cracking and falling down. But the majority of them are there. The good news is a former resident of the house actually made molds of them. So they actually could be reproduced. And I think that the molds are, they're not perfect molds, but I think that they would be able to approximate the original. And again, the connection to Sullivan, whose Guarantee Trust building you see a detail from on the right, is obvious. The dining room table, at least 6 dining room chairs, and a chandelier with capichelle shades made their way also into the Park Street dining room. The 2 corner china cabinets are also there, but now each is joined to a server base and no longer mounted on the wall. This is really fascinating. Here we have that part that we've been watching through lots of different installations in Rolf's house. Now it's actually been joined to the server below. Very important. Very interesting that he took a hanging cabinet and actually joined it to a server that it used to hang over top of. Very interesting sort of evolution of his own interiors. The other one is hidden, but it's back over here. There were a pair of them, and there still are extant today, a pair of them. The Park Street bedroom was furnished with the 1904 Octagon table and a kneeler. Apparently, Anna Catherine liked to pray. They were good Protestants, and she, in fact, had a kneeler in her bedroom right there. There's the Octagon table. This incredible floral screen is unfortunately unknown today. It would be quite amazing if anyone found that. It has this really great latticework leg structure down here, and inset probably textile panels, which are related, of course, to Stickley's use of inset panels like that. It would be really quite fascinating if someone located that. From the same room, of course, the Octagon table, and here you see the dresser, which was shown at the Pan American and ended up in their home as well. Back here you can see here it's later set with, of course, electric bulbs rather than candles, a practicality that seems reasonable. And then finally you can see also here a rocking chair that's now in the collection of the Virginia Museum in Richmond. That piece is there. There's a taboret here, another angle of the Octagon table. That same ceramic, it's quite fun, that same ceramic that has appeared through all their houses and was the one in that original drawing in 1888. I think they really liked that vase. And then also this fascinating triangular cabinet, which I've also never heard of extant, would be, it may or may not be great, but it would be really fascinating if someone found that. Even as late as October of 1925, Rohlfs continued to show interest in publishing his interiors. A photo of the corner of the Monks Club featured some examples of the Rohlfs style, which attained wide vogue as the mission style, as they called it. Apropos of their setting, the austere utilitarian examples of this furniture, wall decorations, and lighting shown in the Monks Club were typical of the mission style. It is unclear whether Rohlfs' workshop undertook this commission any time near 1925 when it was published. It may have been many years earlier, or Rohlfs may have just been repeating some of his earlier designs even as late as 1925. A month later, the Buffalo Arts Journal published a photograph of a baronial business office shown here on the right. And it was accompanied by the following text. Above is the office of C.W. Robinson, president of a Detroit piano manufacturer. The desk, chairs, inkstand, and tabouret were designed and carved by Charles Rohlfs. The etching of the Aurelian column on the wall is 11 feet high and was brought from Rome by Mr. Rohlfs. The frame was carved in a harmonious design by him. Again, we have no idea whether or not at the date of publication any of this Rohlfs furniture, was new. It's probably more likely Rohlfs' increasing concern with his own legacy that caused these articles to be published about him and these pictures to be shown at such a late date as 1925. Although the interiors Rohlfs designed for patrons demonstrate his interest and skill in creating beautiful and harmonious environments, the Rohlfs home must be viewed as a collection of extraordinary objects perhaps too tightly packed into a small space to be appreciated as they could be when they're seen in a purer setting. The greatest collection ever assembled of Charles Rohlfs decorative art objects was, of course, his own, mostly because he couldn't sell them. Their assemblage may not have created a sublimely beautiful environment or interior, but the works must have given enormous pleasure to Anna Catherine and to Charles. From his earliest efforts to create works for the Rohlfs homes in his Norwood Avenue interior, to his Adirondack camps and to the Park Street home, this angle, I think, on Charles Rohlfs' achievement certainly provides new perspectives on his extraordinary contributions to early 20th century design. Thank you very much. And as a shameless plug, I'm going to show you the exhibition tour so that you can plan now for your future travel. Go online, buy those tickets now. The show, as we heard, will open in Milwaukee. Then it will travel to Dallas next fall, this fall. Then to the Carnegie early in the next year. Then it'll be in the midsection of the year at the Huntington in San Marino, which is, of course, always a lovely place to be. And then finally back here at the Met in late 2010 and through January of 2011. So with that, I will turn it over to questions for anyone who has them. Yes.
My question. Oh, thank you. My question: how hands-on was Charles in the workshops?
It's a great question. There was only one person who was ever listed on the Buffalo directories, to my knowledge, as a wood carver in his shop, a gentleman named George Thiel. George Thiel didn't actually show up until 1902. That's the first year he's listed on the directory. And after that, he was listed some years, but not all years. He seemed to have sometimes been working for Rohlfs and sometimes not. That seems to lead one to believe that all the people listed as cabinet makers, joiners, accountants, other functions in the shop, and there are a number of them, they came and went. Because Rohlfs doesn't seem to have been all that easy to get along with, and because people came to learn skills and then they seemed to move on. A lot of them worked first for Roycroft, then they would come and learn some skills at Rohlfs, and then they would go work for Stickley. They moved around quite frequently, and I'm not sure how even his business was in terms of his need for other employees. The most employees I could identify was 1 year, 1901, unsurprisingly, when he was finishing up all of his preparations for the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo that year, for which he made, of course, his own booth, and he made the outfittings of a few other booths. During that year, he had as many as 7 or 8. It's a little unclear who was there at when, but he had either 7 or 8 employees in that year. Usually it was about 2 or 3, and extremely rarely does it seem that anyone else was carving the pieces. Most of the boards seem to have been carved, probably by him.
What was his draw to Buffalo?
I'm sorry?
It sounded like you moved to Buffalo.
Absolutely.
What drew him?
Great question. What would draw anyone to Buffalo? No, Buffalo's a wonderful place, actually. No, it's a great question. He moved there because he got a really great offer for a job at an industrial foundry, the Jewett Manufacturing concern, which was one of, I think it was the second largest industrial foundry in the country at the time. And he was brought up as a head designer and a foundry manager. So he was actually one of the heads of the foundry. He had been a pattern maker for stoves, and of course he learned very well how to carve the patterns for the cast iron stoves. That of course helped him be a wood carver eventually, but in the meantime he became really, really good at that, and he became very widely known. He patented many designs for cast iron stoves, and he became very successful in that. So he frankly got offered a really, really great job. She was an author, so she could do her work wherever she was. So they went up to Buffalo, which of course was a fantastic, bustling city at the time. There were wonderful notices of their welcome into the society of Buffalo. They were considered important artists and important contributors to the cultural life of Buffalo, and they really made an impact up there. And they were brought up like, you know, noted citizens of Buffalo even before they got there. Yes?
You started your lecture off with the quarter interior sketch of one of his own homes, and I'm wondering, did you come across interior sketches that he made either for any of the camps in the Adirondacks or for the home of Marshall Field or any of the other people he made, he designed furniture?
This is a great question about the existence of sketches for other interiors. There's an unfortunate story about the drawings. All of the drawings of Charles Rohlfs' workshop were in his his Park Street house in Buffalo when he died. Unfortunately, his son Roland recounted later to Robert Judson Clark, who was a noted scholar and teacher at Princeton, who was the only person to interview Roland during his life. Roland unfortunately reported that Charles Rohlfs destroyed, not Charles Rohlfs, that he destroyed all of the drawings that were left. And the reason was sort of twofold. One, he had a basement full of furniture that he had to figure out what to do with. And secondly, he had all this paper, and he looked at the two things, and he decided, well, I only have the energy to save one of these two things. He saved the furniture, and what he told Robert Judson Clark, whose notes from those interviews I actually now own, he simply reported that they were destroyed at the time. So there are very, very, very few extant drawings for interiors or pieces of furniture virtually at all. And in fact, one of the only drawings that there is extant is, amazingly enough, for one of those Adirondack chairs with the little trees carved in the side of them. Yes?
Is there any evidence that in Rolf's time that there were purchases of his furniture that were buying sculpture disguised as furniture?
This is also a great question. I unfortunately don't know very much about the clients of Rohlfs or what they were buying for, mostly because there are no log books. The family saved all the period photos, they saved correspondence, they saved a little bit of drawing, things like that, but really no log books of any kind. So I unfortunately don't know much about that at all. There's one case, actually, some of you may know, the exciting chair that appeared on the Antiques Roadshow, which is an exciting chair, actually, which is a mahogany version of the chair that's actually on the cover of the book. This chair is actually, I was able to track down a fair amount of information about before even the show aired, which was kind of exciting. That chair actually was purchased for a very specific purpose, and surprisingly enough, not for sculpture. It was purchased as a wedding gift, probably it was the marriage of a gentleman from Buffalo and his wife from the Philadelphia area. And they got married, and they either received it as a gift or they bought it as a commemoration of their wedding in 1907, the year that it was made. That's one of the rare cases where we actually have any kind of real storyline about the connection that the client had to Rohlfs. In the case of Camp Reed, there's actually an interesting sort of funny Buffalo story, which is, and I'll try to get all of this right because this is really distant research, but I'm pretty sure that I'll get this right, and Bruce, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. The gentleman, Mr. Reed, William Reed, who built the camp, his daughter actually eventually was married, I believe, to Knox's son or Albright's son, one or the other, one of the founders of the Albright Knox. And so there was a fun Buffalo connection there and sort of a prominent artistic family. But in general, we don't know much about the clients. Again, future research, I hope. Yes?
You mentioned colour being an important aspect, and there's reference to the peacock blue cushion. Is there any work that we could, is there any evidence to suggest that some of the furniture was left in its natural colour without being stained so heavily as we've seen in recent exhibits?
The little bit of artifact references we have to finish are a couple advertisements where the finish is either described as fumed dark oak. It's sometimes referred to as gold rubbed, like in the case of that description. And there is a reference to a later catalog that describes the finish as lighter per request, which is kind of an interesting change of fashion, that people had decided that they were less interested in very dark oak furniture and they were increasingly interested in lighter oak furniture, which is sort of an interesting reference to finish. But aside from period finish books, which I don't have any particular reason to believe he was straying far from, I know the size of where I know the size of the space where he was doing his finishing. It was relatively small. There was not a large fuming chamber. Usually, what he did is he brushed on the finish directly. He often sealed things with what he called a thin layer of shellac. Other than those little references to coatings, we don't know a lot about use of color, other than the pieces that have come down through the ages with intact interiors, for example, that are bright green or bright red. But we have little references here and there. It does seem very much like a great deal of the finish was quite dark originally, and he refers to that in a number of early advertisements mentioning a very dark finish. Often which was, of course, coated with shellac, which probably means that some of those pieces then lived on in the world quite dark for a very long time. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you just give us an idea of how many examples of this work are known to exist?
It's a great question. How many works of Rohlfs are out there in the world? Well, it's sort of complicated. If you're talking about sort of really serious objects, larger than the candlestick variety, there are probably 600 to 900 extant works. If you're talking about including the candlesticks, you're over 1,000 because there are a lot of those. But in terms of major works, it's sort of 500 to 800, 600 to 900, something like that. Yes?
How was his work priced when he was trying to sell his furniture?
His work was very expensive, especially compared to even high-priced competitors like Stickley, because Stickley's furniture, for example, was notably much more expensive than a lot of his Grand Rapids competitors. And if you take a jump up from Grand Rapids to get to Stickley, you take a big jump to get to Rohlfs. It was priced as high as you sort of imagine it would be given the complexity. A good example is the highest priced work that I have ever found documented, which is a very complex canopy bed that he showed at the Pan American Exposition. That piece is priced on the back of the period photo at $350, which was many, many thousands of dollars during the period. It was an extremely expensive piece. Even fairly standard models were surprisingly expensive. It was not democratic furniture by any means. And the bed never sold. I should have mentioned that. The bed was eventually cut down and used in his own house, just like most everything he made. The canopy was cut off because they couldn't get in the front door. So they cut the canopy off and they modified the lower cabinet. And he used it as his own bed. It was very expensive and didn't sell well. Anything else? He did make his own bed, and then he did, in fact, lie in it. Thank you very much.